When Virginia Crawford's husband betrays her in the midst of her mother's life-or-death surgery, he thinks he orchestrated the perfect escape with her family's fortune. What he doesn't know is, Virginia's been quietly laying a trap that will not only destroy his schemes, but unravel a nationwide web of greed. In a world where loyalty is rare and legacies are fragile, the quietest woman in the room becomes the deadliest opponent. Mrs. Crawford, your mother's condition is critical. We need to operate immediately. The doctor's voice echoed through the sterile hospital corridor as Virginia Crawford gripped her phone tighter, attempting to reach her husband Douglas for the sixth time. When he finally answered, his irritation was palpable. "What is it now, Virginia?" "I'm in an important meeting," he snapped, the familiar coldness in his tone making her stomach clench. "Mom's being rushed into emergency surgery. I need you here," I pleaded, my voice cracking as the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. "Sorry, I can't make it. Big things are happening." "Just handle it yourself," he replied, hanging up without another word. At that moment at St. Luke's Hospital in Birmingham, I finally admitted to myself that my marriage was beyond saving. As I watched the nurses wheel my mother toward the ICU, memories of happier times flooded back. Summer afternoons in our family's Victorian estate, the scent of mother's roses wafting through open windows, father's warm laughter echoing through the ornate halls. That estate had been in our family for 4 generations, and after my father passed away 3 years ago, my mother and I inherited it together. The old house meant everything to us. Every creaking floorboard, every intricate molding told our family story. Douglas used to understand that, or at least I thought he did. When we first married 15 years ago, he would spend weekends helping mother tend to her beloved garden. But somewhere along the way, my husband's heart turned as cold as marble. As I sat in the ICU waiting room, my phone buzzed with a text from Douglas. "Secured my future. Just sold the estate. Leaving for Brazil tonight with someone who actually makes me happy. Goodbye." A strange calm washed over me as I read his message. What Douglas didn't know was that I had been watching his every move for months. My private investigator had kept me well informed of his schemes, including his affair with his young secretary and their plans to flee the country. I typed back a single word: fascinating. Looking at my mother's fragile form through the ICU window, I felt a fierce determination rise within me. Douglas had no idea what was coming. Sometimes the best revenge is letting someone walk straight into the trap they set for themselves. Douglas wasn't always this way. When we first met at a charity gala in Birmingham 15 years ago, he was different. Kind, ambitious, and genuinely caring. He worked as a junior partner at a law firm then, and his eyes would light up when he talked about helping his clients. I remember how he used to bring coffee to my father during long discussions about estate management, eager to learn and understand our family's legacy. The Victorian estate had been more than just a home to us. Built in 1887 by my great-grandfather, it stood as a testament to our family's history. Every Christmas, every celebration, every quiet Sunday afternoon was spent within those walls. I can still picture my grandmother sitting in her favorite corner of the library, telling me stories about the generations before us. "Family isn't just about blood, Virginia," she would say, her eyes twinkling with wisdom. "It's about trust and protecting what matters most." The changes in Douglas were subtle at first. About 5 years ago, he started spending more time at the office, coming home later and later. When my father passed away 3 years ago, something shifted in him completely. He began questioning every financial decision I made, insisting on having more control over the estate's affairs. I noticed small things missing from the house: antique pieces, family jewelry, items he claimed were just being appraised. 2 months ago, I found receipts for a luxury condo in Rio de Janeiro in his email. That's when I hired Juliana, the private investigator. "Your husband's been meeting with various potential buyers," she reported last week. "He's been showing them forged documents claiming full ownership of the estate." The irony of it all would have made me laugh if it weren't so painful. Douglas had spent years trying to gain control of the estate, not knowing that my grandmother had placed it in an irrevocable trust long before he entered our lives. She had seen similar situations unfold in other wealthy families and had taken steps to protect our legacy. My phone buzzed again with another message from Douglas. "You'll thank me when you see how much I got for that old house. Time to move on." I tucked the phone away, my hand finding comfort in the worn leather of my grandmother's diary in my purse. Inside lay the truth that would soon shatter Douglas's plans completely. The ICU waiting room grew colder as night fell, and the hours dragged on with no word from the surgical team. My nerves frayed with every tick of the clock until Juliana called with news that made my blood run cold. "Virginia, I have something you need to see right away," she said, her voice urgent. "Can you check your email?" Opening the attachment, my hands trembled. Dozens of photos flashed across the screen, each one a dagger to the heart. Douglas ate expensive restaurants with his secretary Angela, shopping for jewelry at Tiffany's, and visiting high-end real estate offices. Yet it was not their escapades that made my stomach lurch. It was the documents visible in some of the shots, clearly showing forged signatures and falsified ownership papers. "He's been systematically emptying your personal accounts for months," Juliana explained. "The estate sale is just the final piece. He's already transferred most of your liquid assets to offshore accounts." I pulled up my banking app and felt the ground shift beneath me. My personal account showed a balance of just $842. The joint account we shared was completely empty. Tears stung my eyes as the realization settled like a stone in my chest. He'd been planning this for months, maybe years.
My phone buzzed again.
Douglas had sent another text. "By the way, I took care of those dusty old photo albums in the library. Nobody needs that sentimental junk anymore. The buyers want the house empty by next week." The photo albums, my mother's precious memories, generations of our family history reduced to junk in his eyes. I felt physically ill. The security camera feed from the estate popped up on my phone showing Douglas and Angela loading boxes into his car. They were laughing, champagne glasses in hand, celebrating in our family home while my mother fought for her life in surgery. Juliana's voice brought me back to reality. "There's more. He's booked 2 first-class tickets to Rio de Janeiro for tonight. And he's been recording your phone calls with the hospital. He wanted to ensure your mother was too ill to interfere with the sale." The full weight of his betrayal crashed over me. He hadn't just been stealing our money. He'd been orchestrating our downfall with clinical precision. He timed everything perfectly, thinking I would be too distraught about my mother to notice what he was doing. But what he failed to consider was that while he was laying his trap, I was quietly reinforcing mine. The doctor appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Crawford, your mother is stable. The surgery was successful, but she'll need extensive care during recovery." I clutched my grandmother's diary tighter, feeling the hidden documents inside that would be Douglas's undoing. He thought he had planned everything perfectly, but he had no idea what was coming. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just about winning. It's about letting your enemy lose everything on their own terms. "Mr. Reynolds, this is Virginia Crawford. I understand you're the buyer Douglas arranged for our estate." My voice was steady, masking the anger churning inside me. Yes, Mrs. Crawford. Your husband mentioned you'd be calling to finalize the details. I must say, $3.2 million is a steal for such a beautiful property." He sounded pleased with himself. "And you've already transferred the funds?" I asked, watching my mother's peaceful, sleeping face. "Yes, just this morning. Your husband was quite insistent on immediate payment. Said something about an investment opportunity in Brazil that couldn't wait." I smiled grimly. "Mr. Reynolds, I suggest you contact your bank immediately and stop that transfer. You see, Douglas doesn't actually have the authority to sell the estate." There was a long pause. "I'm sorry, what?" "The property is in an irrevocable trust. Any sale without proper documentation from the trust administrator is fraudulent." I could hear the panic rising in Mr. Reynolds's voice as he scrambled to verify my claims. I had no doubt the forged documents Douglas provided would crumble under any real scrutiny. Juliana's message pinged onto my phone, confirming that the bank had frozen the transaction just in time. Douglas's elaborate scheme had begun to unravel, but I knew this was only the beginning. Juliana slipped into the hospital waiting room, her expression a mix of urgency and grim satisfaction. "Virginia, there's more. Douglas has been systematically draining not just your personal accounts, but your mother's retirement funds as well. He set up automatic transfers scheduled to execute within the next 12 hours. If we hadn't intervened, he would have wiped everything clean. I stared at my phone, the cold fury inside me boiling over into icy determination. Not only had he betrayed me, but he had also exploited my mother during her most vulnerable moments. His callousness knew no bounds, and for that, he deserved to watch his empire of lies crumble piece by piece. "We need to act fast," Juliana said, pulling out her laptop and connecting to the estate's security system. "I've traced Angela's movements. She's been coordinating with a demolition crew scheduled to arrive tomorrow morning. Douglas promised the buyers a clean slate, and he's eager to erase every trace of the estate's history." The audacity of it all left me breathless. Douglas had orchestrated this entire operation with chilling precision, but he underestimated the safeguards my grandmother had put in place. She had lived through betrayals of her own and had fortified the estate with legal and technological protections that even Douglas's greed could not bypass. Juliana's laptop screen came alive with live footage from the estate's security cameras. Angela was there, brazenly entering through a side window, heading straight for the study. "She's going after the safe," Juliana noted, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "What she doesn't know is that your grandmother installed a failsafe. The moment that safe is opened by an unauthorized user, the entire room locks down." I watched as Angela triumphantly opened the safe, only to realize she had trapped herself. The study's doors slammed shut, and a fine mist sprayed into the room. It was harmless, but laced with an invisible UV dye that would mark anyone inside for weeks. Juliana's lips curled into a satisfied smile. "She's not going anywhere." The adrenaline surged through me as Juliana's phone rang. It was Agent Sarah Martinez from the FBI, her voice urgent. "Mrs. Crawford, we intercepted Douglas at the airport. He tried to board a flight to Rio with Angela's documents. We have him in custody, but there's a problem. He was attempting to transfer another $500,000 from your mother's accounts right before we detained him." Douglas's desperation was palpable, his grand escape unraveling into a public spectacle. "Let him try," I said, my voice steely. "The accounts are secure. The trust is ironclad. Every move he makes only tightens the noose around his own neck." Agent Martinez's tone shifted. "There's something else." Douglas's laptop contained files implicating multiple victims. He's been running this scheme across state lines, targeting families during medical emergencies, forging documents, and laundering money through shell companies. "This is bigger than just your estate." Juliana's screen flickered as more data poured in. "We have Angela's communications, too. She's been orchestrating these scams alongside Douglas, using her position to access confidential records of vulnerable families. This isn't just betrayal, it's organized exploitation." My heart pounded as the weight of their crimes came into full view. They had perfected a system of manipulation, preying on trust and vulnerability. But now, their web was untangling, and every victim would see justice served. Suddenly, Juliana's system alerted her to a new breach attempt. Angela, still locked in the study, was desperately trying to destroy documents from the safe. "We need to get officers there now," Juliana said, already dialing. "Wait," I interrupted. "Let her try. My grandmother designed that safe not just to protect, but to expose. Every document she touches is embedded with a traceable marker. She can't erase the evidence. She can only bury herself deeper." Within minutes, the police arrived at the estate. Juliana's laptop displayed Angela's futile resistance as officers calmly apprehended her, her hands glowing under UV lights. The evidence was irrefutable, her capture as inevitable as Douglas's downfall. Back at the hospital, my mother stirred awake. Her frail hand reached for mine, and in her tired eyes, I saw the quiet strength that had sustained our family for generations. "This state is safe, Mom," I whispered. "Grandmother's plan worked perfectly." "Of course it did," she replied weakly, a faint smile on her lips. "She always said the best traps are the ones they walk into themselves." Agent Martinez returned with an update. "We found Douglas's go bag in his car. Passports, cash, even your grandmother's original will." He thought he had the only copy. I pulled out the diary from my purse, revealing the real will hidden within its spine. He only had what we wanted him to find, I said, knowing that every move had been anticipated. The following days were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Douglas and Angela, now clad in prison uniforms, sat silently as the charges piled up. Fraud, conspiracy, attempted theft. The prosecutor's voice echoed through the courtroom, the evidence overwhelming and indisputable. When the judge denied them bail, Douglas's gaze found mine. His expression was a mixture of fury and disbelief. He had underestimated the legacy of the Crawford family, the layers of protection crafted through wisdom and foresight. As he was led away in handcuffs, I felt no triumph, only a solemn sense of justice. The estate remained intact, its walls whispering stories of resilience and heritage. My mother, recovering steadily, returned home to a house that stood not just as a building but as a symbol of everything we fought to protect. Juliana and Agent Martinez stood beside me in the library, the late afternoon sun casting a golden glow on the shelves lined with history. Sometimes, Juliana mused, the best victories are the quiet ones, where the enemy defeats themselves. Indeed, I replied, tracing my fingers over my grandmother's diary. And sometimes, the strongest legacy is the one that cannot be stolen, only safeguarded. 2 weeks after Douglas and Angela's arrest, the Crawford estate stood as a fortress of resilience, untouched by the storm of greed that had tried to consume it. Yet the battle was far from over. Agent Martinez's investigation had unearthed layers of deception, stretching beyond Douglas's schemes. There were partners, silent investors who had financed his fraudulent ventures, and their shadows loomed large. Virginia, Juliana said one morning, sliding a confidential folder across the mahogany table in the library. We've traced Douglas's shell corporations to a network of offshore accounts tied to a consortium of real estate developers. They were planning to replicate his scam across multiple historic estates. Your family's property was just the prototype. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. Douglas was never working alone. He was a pawn, emboldened by his greed, but manipulated by larger forces. These developers saw heritage homes as mere plots of land for profit, indifferent to the legacies embedded in every brick. As Juliana outlined the findings, my mother's soft voice drifted from her armchair. They thought a house was just a building. They never understood that it holds a family soul. That afternoon, Agent Martinez arrived with urgent news. Virginia, we have credible intel that Douglas, desperate and cunning as ever, had arranged for a data leak. He encrypted sensitive documents detailing not only his crimes, but those of his backers. If released, it could trigger financial havoc, but it could also expose the entire network.
What does he want?
I asked, the weight of exhaustion and determination entwined in my tone. A bargaining chip. His lawyer is preparing a proposal. Immunity for him and Angela in exchange for the files. Over my dead body, I said. But a plan was already forming. Sometimes, the best way to dismantle a network is to let it implode from within. Juliana and I devised a countermeasure. We would intercept the files, authenticate them, and leak them ourselves, but in a way that safeguarded the innocent and incriminated the guilty beyond negotiation. That night, Juliana's fingers flew across her laptop as she infiltrated Douglas's hidden server. Lines of code blurred as firewalls crumbled. I've got it, she whispered. But there's a catch. Douglas set a digital dead man switch. If we access certain files, it triggers a cascade of fake documents designed to discredit the real evidence. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Then we need a diversion. With Agent Martinez's team executing a coordinated raid on the offshore data centers, Juliana initiated the breach. As the fake files flooded decoy servers, the authentic documents streamed into secured FBI channels. Douglas's bargaining chip had turned into his noose. The following morning, headlines blazed with revelations. A sprawling fraud network dismantled.
Properties saved.
Families vindicated. Douglas and Angela's faces plastered across every news outlet, their story transformed from a local betrayal to a national scandal. At the courthouse, during their final sentencing hearing, Douglas sat slumped, a shell of the man who once boasted about his conquests. Angela, her defiance extinguished, refused to meet anyone's gaze. The judge's verdict was swift and unforgiving. Multiple life sentences without parole. The courtroom erupted into a mixture of gasps and applause. As they were led away, Douglas's eyes found mine one last time. There was no rage, no malice, only a hollow acceptance of a game lost. I held his gaze unflinching until he disappeared from view. Outside, the crisp autumn air carried a sense of closure. Reporters clamored for statements, but I had none to give. The estate, my mother, our legacy, those were my priorities now. Back at the estate, restoration efforts breathed new life into every corner. The garden flourished, the library echoed with quiet conversations, and for the first time in years, the house felt like a home again. Juliana joined me in the study one evening, a glass of wine in hand. You know, Virginia, most people would have crumbled under what you've endured. I smiled, glancing at my grandmother's diary resting on the desk. That's because most people don't come from a line of women who knew that real strength is quiet, patient, and precise.
Agent Martinez called that night.
Virginia, thanks to your family's meticulous records and Juliana's expertise, we've identified and recovered assets stolen from dozens of families. The Crawford estate didn't just survive, it became the key to unraveling a nationwide fraud. I thanked her, knowing that while the battle had been personal, the victory was collective. As the sun set over the Crawford estate, casting golden light through stained glass windows, I stood in the library, surrounded by the whispers of my ancestors. Their sacrifices, their wisdom, had shielded us. The story of our family was no longer just ink on yellowed pages. It was alive, resilient, and untouchable. And as for Douglas, his name would fade into oblivion, a cautionary tale buried under the weight of his own greed. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't loud or vengeful. It's the quiet perseverance of a legacy that outlasts every betrayal. The Crawford estate stood, timeless and triumphant, a beacon of everything they had tried and failed to destroy.